Hey everyone, tonight, we're venturing into the shadows of the medieval world, not to revisit kings or legendary battles, but to expose the secret society. You've never heard of a group whose influence ran deeper than royal blood, and whose mysteries are buried beneath centuries of silence. Before we uncover these hidden truths, take a second to like the video, and subscribe if you're truly captivated, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It always amazes me to see how far these stories travel, so get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's unravel these hidden histories together. The monks who traded silence for secret intelligence networks. Tonight, we delve into a hidden world where silence was not just a vow, but a powerful weapon. The cloistered monks, bound by sacred oaths of silence, were not merely isolated souls devoted to prayer and contemplation. Beneath the surface of their quiet cloisters, these monks orchestrated one of the medieval era's most secret and sophisticated intelligence networks, a shadow system that mapped political unrest, monitored rival kingdoms, and quietly shaped the fate of nations. At first glance, the vow of silence seemed to render these monks powerless in worldly affairs. The rule of Saint Benedict, which many monastic orders followed, demanded strict silence to foster spiritual discipline and inner reflection. Any speech was limited to designated times and places. Any breach could result in severe punishment. Yet, it was precisely this silence that allowed them to operate unseen and unheard, embedding themselves as invisible agents in a world rife with turmoil and power struggles. Monasteries were often situated at strategic crossroads near borders, trade routes, and pilgrimage paths. These locations made them natural hubs for gathering and transmitting information. Pilgrims and travelers passing through carried news from far-flung regions, reports of skirmishes, royal edicts, economic changes, and rumors of rebellion. The monks received these stories not with idle curiosity, but with calculated attention, noting details and subtle shifts in tone and content. To maintain their silence outwardly, monks devised ingenious methods for secret communication. One primary tool was the pilgrim's journal, a seemingly mundane travelogue, recording daily devotions, spiritual reflections, and local sights. Hidden within these texts were coded messages, symbolic illustrations, marginal annotations, and layered texts, conveyed clandestine intelligence that only the initiated could interpret. The monks mastered cryptic language, using biblical references or alchemical symbols as cipher keys. Through these pilgrim journals, they disseminated information across vast distances without uttering a word. This network extended beyond the monastery walls. Certain monks, specially trained in the art of cryptography and espionage, were dispatched, disguised as pilgrims, merchants, or even envoys. Their true mission was to gather first-hand intelligence, forge alliances, and relay critical updates back to the mother house. This system operated under layers of secrecy, with trust carefully guarded. Any suspicion of betrayal or exposure could mean imprisonment or death. Historically, this intelligence gathering played a crucial role during periods of political instability, such as the investiture controversy, the power struggles between the papacy and Holy Roman emperors, or regional conflicts between competing noble houses. Monks monitored troop movements, intercepted coded letters, and even influenced negotiations by selectively leaking information. Their reports reached kings, popes, and nobles who valued this secret counsel, often shaping decisions behind the scenes. The monks' silence was a double-edged sword. It preserved their sanctity and protected their covert activities, but it also created an aura of mystery and suspicion. Secular authorities were sometimes wary of monastic influence, accusing orders of conspiracies or witchcraft. Yet, the monks navigated this precarious position with remarkable skill, maintaining their spiritual facade while weaving an intricate web of political awareness. Moreover, this secret intelligence network was not just about espionage, it was about survival. Monasteries depended on the favor of local rulers and the stability of their realms. By staying informed and intervening subtly, monks helped safeguard their communities from the ravages of war, famine, or persecution. Their information exchanges could prompt timely warnings, allowing vulnerable populations to prepare or flee. In addition to the pilgrim journals, physical routes were established, hidden paths, and safe houses known only to trusted members of the order. These clandestine channels allowed the secure transfer of messages, relics, and even individuals deemed vital to the cause. The routes crisscrossed kingdoms, often disguised as pilgrimage trails or merchant roads, blending seamlessly into the everyday flow of medieval life. This system, refined over centuries, laid foundations for later intelligence practices in Europe. The monastic model of coded communication, covert travel, and the strategic use of silence anticipated early modern espionage tactics. It also illustrates how religious devotion and political maneuvering were often intertwined in medieval society, each shaping the other in subtle, profound ways. As we reflect on this, it challenges our modern perceptions of monks as solely ascetic and removed from worldly affairs. Instead, they were deeply embedded in the currents of power, wielding silence as a cloak to protect their knowledge and influence. Their story is a testament to the complex interplay between faith, secrecy, and political survival in a turbulent age. So next time you imagine a silent monastery, consider the hidden voices behind the walls, the secret networks, the coded journals, the unseen messengers all working quietly to map a world of unrest and change. Their silence was not absence. It was presence, power, and profound influence. This hidden intelligence, forged by the monks, reminds us that sometimes the most potent weapons are those that speak without sound and see without being seen. The quiet custodians of knowledge shaped history, not with swords or proclamations, but with whispers, signs, and unbroken vows of silence. Their legacy is one of subtlety, strategy, and survival, and echo that still resonates in the shadows of history. Thank you for joining this journey into the secretive world of the monks who traded silence for power. If you found this story intriguing, please like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. The world of history is full of whispers waiting to be heard, and together we'll listen to every one. The healers, who used disguise spells in medical recipes. Hey guys, tonight we journey into the shadowed corners of medieval medicine, not to marvel at cures and herbs alone, but to uncover a secret that few have dared to speak about openly. While healers tended wounds and brewed potions, some among them wove darker threads into their work, disguised spells hidden within the very remedies meant to heal. These were the healers who did not just mend flesh, but also guarded knowledge, fiercely, embedding coded curses and protections into their medical recipes. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video if you enjoy deep dives into forgotten histories. Subscribe if you want more intense stories from the past, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a soft fan or ambient sound, and let's delve into the enigmatic world of disguised magical medicine. In medieval Europe, medicine was a fragile science, often intertwined with superstition, faith, and the mystical. Healing was not purely about herbs and physical treatment. It was also a spiritual battle against unseen forces. Within this complex ecosystem, certain herbal guilds emerged, secretive groups who combined practical knowledge of plants with arcane wisdom. They created remedy scrolls that contained instructions for treatments, but, hidden in plain sight, these scrolls also carried spells, some meant to protect the healer or the patient, others meant to curse rivals or enemies. These were not obvious enchantments, but encoded incantations, cryptic symbols, and layered language designed to confuse the uninitiated. Only guild members, trained and sworn to secrecy, could decipher which parts of the scrolls were genuine cures and which contained mystical consequences. This blending of medicine and magic was a direct response to the volatile and dangerous environment of the time. Healers often faced suspicion from church authorities, rival apothecaries, or hostile locals who feared the unknown. Embedding spells in medical texts served multiple purposes: to safeguard precious knowledge from outsiders, to protect the healer's own life and practice, and to exert subtle influence or control over those who might misuse or steal their remedies. To understand how this worked, we must look closely at the role of herbal guilds. These guilds were often composed of highly skilled practitioners who passed down their knowledge through apprenticeships. Their remedy scrolls were treasured artifacts, small parchment documents. Other times, elaborate manuscripts filled with detailed botanical drawings and carefully scripted instructions. Yet beneath the surface, these texts held codes. For instance, a certain herb might be listed with an unusual qualifier, or a Latin phrase might be slightly altered, signaling to the initiated that a spell of protection or curse was embedded. Some herbs were attributed qualities not found in traditional herbals, an effect on the spirit, rather than just the body, hinting at magical properties. One documented example comes from medieval Italy, where a guild of healers known as the Herboristi guarded their secrets fiercely. Their remedy scrolls contained veiled warnings. A remedy that could cure a fever might also be cursed to bring misfortune to anyone attempting to replicate it without permission. The curses were not merely symbolic, but believed to carry real power. Rival healers who tried to steal or misuse the remedies reportedly experienced unexplained ailments or sudden accidents. While modern science might dismiss this as coincidence, contemporaries took these warnings seriously, and the fear alone was enough to maintain secrecy. Moreover, protective spells were just as crucial. A healer walking through dangerous territories might carry scrolls with embedded protective enchantments to ward off evil spirits or hostile individuals. These were sometimes written in reversed Latin, coded scripts, or incorporated symbols drawn from alchemy and astrology. The use of such coded language ensured that only those with the proper training could unlock the full meaning. Maintaining the guild's exclusivity, the cultural context deepened the intensity of this practice. In a time when knowledge itself was power, and the line between healer and witch was perilously thin, disguising spells within medical texts was a survival strategy. The Church's suspicion of magical practices meant that overt use of spells risked accusations of heresy or witchcraft. By embedding spells subtly, healers walked a tightrope, practicing their art and protecting their secrets without drawing dangerous attention. Interestingly, the practice of embedding spells was not unique to Europe. Similar traditions existed in other cultures where medicine and magic were intertwined. For example, in Islamic medieval medicine, certain practitioners wrote prayers and protective verses alongside medical recipes, blending faith and healing. In East Asia, shamanistic practices often involved chants and talismans combined with herbal treatments. This global pattern underscores how the mystical was inseparable from medicine for much of human history. But why curses? Why would healers want to curse? The answer lies in competition and protection. Healers often operated in crowded markets, where knowledge was valuable but vulnerable. Stealing a remedy could mean financial ruin or worse. Curses served as deterrent psychological weapons to maintain authority and control. They also reinforced the sacredness of the knowledge, framing it as not just a tool, but a power that demanded respect and obedience. Decoding these disguised spells was a difficult task for historians. Many remedy scrolls have survived, but their magical elements remain elusive, hidden in archaic language and symbols. Modern scholars rely on cross-referencing texts, linguistic analysis, and understanding historical contexts to reveal these hidden layers. Some scrolls contain palimpsest texts, overwritten on older manuscripts, adding complexity to interpretation. One particularly fascinating find is a 14th century remedy scroll from southern France, which contains a layered text. On the surface, it lists cures for common ailments like digestive issues or wounds. But beneath this, hidden in marginal notes and coded symbols, are invocations to saints and spells intended to protect the remedy's efficacy and punish anyone who might misuse it. This dual nature shows how intertwined healing and magic were, and how healers guarded their craft. The psychological impact of these practices must also be acknowledged. For the patient, knowing a remedy was protected by spells could inspire faith and hope, essential components in healing. For the healer, the embedded spells reinforced a sense of control in a dangerous world. For outsiders, The threat of curses created a veil of mystery and fear that preserved the healer's position. Today, the legacy of these disguised spells survives mostly in folklore, rare manuscripts, and academic research. But their existence challenges our modern view of medicine as purely scientific and rational. It reminds us that medicine, for much of history, was a complex dance of science, belief, secrecy, and power. So next time you think of a healer in the medieval era, picture not just a humble gatherer of herbs, but a guardian of hidden knowledge, weaving coded magic into cures, balancing between salvation and threat, healing and harm, science and sorcery. This secret world of disguised spells in remedy scrolls offers a haunting glimpse into a past where every cure came with a secret, every recipe a riddle, and every healer a magician. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the mysterious and intense history of medieval healers who encoded magic into their remedies. If you found this fascinating, please like and subscribe for more stories that unearth the forgotten, the secret, and the shadowed histories of our world. Let me know in the comments your thoughts, or if you know of any other mysterious practices from history you want explored. Until next time, keep questioning what history hides beneath the surface. The guild that used lost words to trigger memory erosion. Hey guys, tonight we journey into a shadowed corner of history where language itself was weaponized not for communication, but for erasure. We explore the secretive world of an elite linguistic guild, a brotherhood of scholars and sorcerers who mastered what they called the lost words, forbidden syllables whispered only in hidden chambers. These words were no ordinary sounds. They carried the uncanny power to erode memory, to dissolve trauma, or, more darkly, to silence enemies by clouding their minds with a creeping fog of forgetfulness. Before we dive deep, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you appreciate this kind of mysterious history exploration. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see the global tapestry of viewers joining the journey. The idea that words can alter reality is ancient, found in cultures around the world. But this guild, often veiled in obscurity, elevated this concept to a terrifying mastery. Records suggest they emerged during the late medieval period, a time when mystical knowledge and linguistic theory intertwined tightly with political power and psychological control. Their members were not just scribes or linguists, but custodians of secret knowledge. They believed certain phonemes, specific sounds, carried inherent mystical properties. These lost words, believed to be fragments of a primordial language, lost to time, were capable of unlocking or locking parts of the human mind. Historical texts hint at rituals where members of this guild would teach these forbidden syllables only to trusted initiates, swearing oaths of silence under threat of exile or death. The power of these syllables was twofold. On one side, they were employed therapeutically to erase the crippling memories of war, trauma, or personal loss, offering a form of relief that modern psychology still struggles to fully comprehend. On the other side, the same words became tools of oppression. Whispering these syllables over an enemy or a political adversary could induce a creeping mind fog, an insidious mental erosion that made resistance, recollection, or coherent thought impossible. Think about the psychological impact in an age without modern medicine or psychiatric understanding. To lose your memories, your grasp on reality, was tantamount to death. Victims of these linguistic assaults could become shadows of themselves, empty, compliant, or utterly lost. In many ways, this guild operated as an early form of psychological warfare, using language as a weapon sharper than any blade. Their influence, though shadowy, stretched far beyond isolated circles. Monarchs and nobles allegedly sought their services to silence dissent or erase inconvenient pasts. The guild's members were known to craft elaborate linguistic rituals, combining incantations with specific tonal modulations to maximize the effect. Surviving manuscripts, coded in archaic language, describe the careful pronunciation required the cadence, breath control. Even the emotional state of the speaker could alter the outcome drastically. What's fascinating is that the guild's approach reflects early insights into how language and cognition are intertwined. Modern neuroscience confirms that certain sounds and words can activate emotional and memory centers in the brain. Though the Guild lacked our scientific framework, their empirical knowledge gained through centuries of experimentation echoes in today's understanding of neuro-linguistic programming and hypnosis. Their lost words may have been primitive precursors to what we now call cognitive behavioral techniques, but wielded with a far more dangerous edge. Another layer of intrigue is how the Guild's knowledge was almost entirely suppressed. The rise of centralized states, religious authorities wary of unorthodox powers, and the advent of print culture meant that such secretive oral traditions were either co-opted or destroyed. Some say that the Guild's knowledge was deliberately buried to prevent abuse, while others whisper that it survived in coded forms within grimoire and mystical texts, passed down to select occult orders or secret societies. One striking historical account comes from a 15th century court document where a noblewoman accused a political rival of employing these words of forgetting to rob her of cherished memories. Though such accusations were often dismissed as superstition, the detailed descriptions of her symptoms, sudden memory lapses, confusion, and emotional numbness bear a haunting resemblance to what we might now call dissociative amnesia induced by trauma or manipulation, whether the Guild's influence was real or mythic. The fact that these stories persisted underscores the deep cultural fear and fascination surrounding language's power to shape the mind. It's also important to reflect on the ethical dimensions of this power. To erase trauma could be compassionate, but to do so without consent, or as punishment, strips away identity itself. Memories, good or bad, are fundamental to what makes us human. The Guild's practices, at their worst, embodied a brutal form of control that predated modern psychological torture techniques by centuries. So, what became of this Guild? Historical evidence grows thin after the 16th century. Some speculate they were absorbed into emerging institutions, their knowledge fragmented and hidden. Others think they went underground, morphing into secret societies obsessed with language and mind control, their influence echoing through mystical and esoteric traditions to this day. It's a chilling reminder that the tools to alter consciousness have long existed, cloaked in silence and shadow. As we consider the power of words in our own time, from media to social influence, the story of this Guild challenges us to reflect on language's double-edged nature. Words can heal, connect, and enlighten, but they can also erase, manipulate, and destroy. The lost words of that ancient Guild are a stark testament to the immense responsibility inherent in the gift of language. Thanks for traveling with me through this hidden linguistic labyrinth tonight. If this journey into forbidden words and memory erosion intrigued you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the strange and powerful secrets history holds. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the idea that words could be used to erase parts of ourselves? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember the stories language tells are as powerful as the silence it can impose. The cartographers who drew maps to places that never existed. Hey guys, tonight, we dive into a world where reality and imagination blur. The secretive realm of royal cartographers who drew maps, not just of lands that were but of places that never truly existed. This story is not a tale of fantasy or myth, but a deeply fascinating, real chapter in the history of cartography and geopolitical strategy. So before we get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy this deep dive, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always incredible to see how this story connects with people all over the world. In the golden age of exploration, when empires vied for dominance and unknown lands awaited discovery, maps were more than mere navigational tools. They were instruments of power, persuasion, and sometimes deception. Royal cartographers, the elite mapmakers employed by monarchs and governments, held the immense responsibility of charting the known world. But intriguingly, they also crafted elaborate maps, peppered with fictional places, phantom islands, non-existent cities, and mysterious regions that only a select few could decode. These were not simple errors or fantasies, but deliberate inclusions, embedded with cryptic ciphers and subtle clues. Why would these masters of precision draw places that never existed? The answer lies in the high-stakes geopolitical chess played by empires. These phantom lands served as testing grounds, bargaining chips, or strategic claims designed to influence rival powers and protect future colonial ambitions. By embedding these fictional locations within real maps, royal patrons could assert dominion over uncharted waters or territories without immediate conflict, creating plausible deniability while keeping their options open. One famous example is the mythical island of Erosion, which appeared on maps for centuries off the west coast of Ireland. Though no one ever found it, Erosion became a staple in European cartography, often depicted shrouded in mist, symbolizing a hidden realm waiting to be claimed. Such islands were more than curiosities, they were placeholders, quietly staking claims in the imagination of rival nations. This practice extended far beyond Europe, affecting maps charted by explorers across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. But these maps weren't mere fabrications slapped onto parchment. Royal cartographers employed layered ciphers, complex codes, interwoven with geographical knowledge, linguistic puzzles, and symbolic imagery. To the untrained eye, the maps appeared authentic and precise, but scholars and insiders knew to look deeper. By deciphering the embedded clues, they could reveal which places were real, which were speculative, and which served as political gambits. This secret code system elevated mapmaking from a craft into a covert art of statecraft and espionage. These fictitious cartographic creations also reveal much about the mindset and fears of the era. At a time when information was scarce, rumors rampant, and dangers lurking in unexplored seas, phantom lands embodied hopes, ambitions, and anxieties. They were manifestations of unknown possibilities, both threatening and enticing. In some cases, these imaginary places were designed to mislead enemies, sending explorers on wild goose chases, wasting resources and time. Moreover, the very existence of such secret maps reflects the early use of disinformation in diplomacy and warfare. Before modern intelligence agencies, kingdoms used cartographers as subtle manipulators of truth, crafting alternate geographies that shaped perceptions and policy. These maps shaped negotiations over borders and colonial rights, influencing treaties and royal decrees. They were a silent language between rulers, a shadow war fought with quills and parchment rather than armies. One of the most fascinating aspects is how these maps survived centuries, often discovered in royal archives or private collections long after their creators had passed. Modern historians and cartography experts have painstakingly studied these documents, peeling back layers of ink and code to reconstruct the political intrigue woven into every line and symbol. The revelations challenge our assumptions about historical geography and remind us how fluid and contested the idea of known world really was. These phantom maps also force us to rethink the nature of knowledge itself. They highlight how what we accept as fact on a map is always mediated by power, intention, and sometimes deception. The royal cartographers remind us that maps are not neutral windows to reality, but are deeply political artifacts shaped by human desires, fears, and ambitions. In their hands, maps became tools not only for exploration, but for control and imagination. In conclusion, the story of the cartographers who drew maps to places that never existed is a profound tale of secrecy, strategy, and the complex interplay between truth and fiction. These royal mapmakers were not just recorders of the world, but architects of an alternate geography that shaped empires and history itself. Their work invites us to look beyond the surface of any map and question the stories hidden in its contours. So the next time you glance at a map, remember there may be secret worlds drawn in shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the hidden art of cartography. If you enjoyed this deep exploration, please like, share, and and subscribe for more stories that unravel history's mysteries. And, as always, I'm eager to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. Until next time, keep wondering, keep questioning, and keep exploring. The sisters who wore veils to conceal secret engineering rings. Hey guys! Tonight we journey into the hidden world of medieval noblewomen far from the battlefield's clangor or the bustling marketplaces. Instead, we enter the quiet cloisters of a convent where behind veils and embroidered hands, secrets of engineering brilliance were carefully woven into the fabric of history. These were not just women of prayer and piety, they were guardians of architectural knowledge, keepers of clandestine wisdom that helped shape the very walls that defended kingdoms and the lifelines that fed cities. Tonight, we uncover the story of the sisters who wore veils to conceal secret engineering rings, an extraordinary chapter where femininity, nobility, and ingenuity converged under the guise of charity and devotion. In an era when women, especially noble-born, were often confined to roles limited by strict societal expectations, these sisters found a remarkable way to exert influence and power. Their convent was not only a sanctuary of spiritual devotion, but also a covert center for technical expertise, particularly in architecture and engineering. Their contributions were vital to the construction of siege defenses fortifications that could hold off armies and aqueducts. Those lifelines of water that sustained burgeoning medieval cities. But how did they pass such knowledge without attracting the scrutiny or suspicion of the men who ruled both church and state? The answer lies in their mastery of embroidery. This was not merely decorative stitching. It was a form of encoded communication. Patterns, stitches, and designs became a language, a cryptic manual that documented complex engineering principles. The sisters developed what historians now call engineering embroidery, where diagrams of arches, supports, and water flow were hidden within religious motifs and floral patterns. To the casual observer, these veils and altar cloths were beautiful artifacts of piety, but to the initiated, they were blueprints, invaluable guides to constructing defenses and infrastructure critical for survival. This practice emerged at a time when formal education for women was rare, and the sharing of technical knowledge was tightly controlled by guilds dominated by men. The convent's noble lineage granted the sisters access to manuscripts and architectural treatises, but transmitting that knowledge openly would have been perilous. Instead, they harnessed embroidery, an acceptable and even revered female craft, to preserve and pass on these secrets. Their veils became tools of empowerment, disguising their roles as engineers behind symbols of chastity and humility. The impact of their work was profound. Siege defenses designed with their hidden guidance could turn the tide of war, transforming humble stone walls into impenetrable fortresses. Their knowledge of hydraulics and aqueduct design helped supply cities with clean water, a critical factor in preventing disease and supporting growth. Yet, these contributions remained shrouded in mystery for centuries. Male chroniclers often overlooked or dismissed the roles of women, especially cloistered ones, and the sisters' true influence was nearly erased from historical records. But traces survived. In some rare manuscripts, marginalia small notes, or sketches in the corners hint at their involvement. Archaeological studies of certain medieval fortresses reveal architectural features that align with designs known to have circulated in these convent networks. Oral histories, passed down through generations of nuns, speak of the hidden stitch and the sacred thread that guided hands far beyond the walls of the convent. This story also challenges our modern assumptions about medieval women and the limits imposed upon them. It reveals a sophisticated network of knowledge sharing that thrived in secrecy but with immense purpose. These sisters were not passive observers but active creators shaping the physical and social landscape. Their veils concealed more than faces, they hid a legacy of technical genius and resilience. As we reflect on this, we see the complex intersections of gender, class, and power in medieval society. The sisters' embroidery was a subtle form of resistance, a way to wield influence without direct confrontation. They exploited the expectations placed on noblewomen, turning what was considered delicate craft into a weapon of survival and innovation. Their story invites us to reconsider the narratives of medieval history, to seek the hidden layers beneath the visible, and to honor the ingenuity that flourished in places we might least expect. So next time you see a finely embroidered veil or tapestry from the medieval period, remember the possibility that beneath its beauty lies a blueprint for survival, stitch by stitch, the silent handiwork of sisters who defied norms and helped build the world we inherited. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the veiled world of secret engineering sisters. If you found this story compelling, please like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into hidden histories. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from in the comments. It's always fascinating to connect with viewers worldwide. Until next time, stay curious and keep uncovering the secrets history has woven for us. The Bellringers who only told 4 hidden deaths. Tonight, we uncover a secret world hidden within the solemn soundscape of medieval monasteries, a brotherhood whose sacred duty was far darker and deeper than anyone outside their walls could ever imagine. The Bellringers who only told 4 hidden deaths were not merely keepers of time or call to prayer. They were guardians of secret codes etched in sound, messengers of forbidden executions and underground martyrdoms, their bells whispering truths that could not be spoken aloud. In the shadowed corridors of medieval Europe, where power, faith, and fear intertwined, the ringing of a bell was never just a signal for worship. Bells were communication devices, instruments of control, and sometimes weapons of coded revelation. Behind the thick stone walls of monasteries, a select brotherhood controlled these bells with a knowledge passed down through generations. Knowledge that transformed each toll into a message so subtle only a few could understand. To grasp the gravity of this brotherhood's role, we must journey back to the turbulent centuries when religious orthodoxy and political intrigue ruled with iron hands. Heresy, rebellion, and dissent were met with swift, often brutal punishment. Executions for crimes against the church or crown were common, yet many of these acts were shrouded in secrecy, hidden from the public eye to avoid unrest or scandal. The Bellringers became the unseen chroniclers of these hidden deaths, encoding signals into their tolls to reveal the fates that were denied open acknowledgement. The sound of a monastery bell ringing was layered with meaning. The cadence, rhythm, and number of tolls could indicate who had died, the manner of their death, and even the injustice behind it. Only the initiated could decode this sonic cipher. These monks were trained in a system so intricate that an untrained ear would only hear the solemn peals of a funeral bell, while insiders understood the hidden narrative of martyrdom or state-sanctioned murder. It was a language of sound, a secret testimony for those silenced by fear and oppression. This brotherhood's existence was itself a carefully guarded secret. Monastic life was governed by vows of silence, obedience, and secrecy, making it an ideal cover for clandestine communication. The Bellringers moved in plain sight but operated within a shadow realm, their tolls bridging the visible world of stone and prayer with the invisible network of political machinations and suppressed truths. Their methods evolved alongside the changing tides of history. In some regions, these secret signals warned of impending executions, allowing sympathizers to prepare or attempt rescue. In others, the tolls served as memorials for those whose deaths the church refused to acknowledge, publicly hidden martyrs who suffered for faith, conscience, or rebellion. The bells were a voice for the voiceless, resonating across valleys and towns, a mournful echo carrying the burden of silent stories. Historical records reveal glimpses of this practice, but often in cryptic references or coded language. Chroniclers noted unusual bell patterns or mysterious funeral tolls that coincided with political purges or religious trials. These descriptions hint at a sophisticated system where sound was weaponized as both warning and witness, preserving history in a way that parchment or public announcement could not. One particularly poignant case comes from 14th century France during the height of the Inquisition. A certain monastery's bellringers were observed to ring a peculiar sequence, immediately following a secret trial held under the cover of darkness. The locals later whispered that this toll was a lament for a noblewoman executed for alleged heresy, and execution officially denied and erased from records. The bell toll became a subversive act of remembrance, a sonic rebellion against enforced silence. But the risks for the bell ringers were immense. To toll for hidden deaths was to challenge authority, to expose secrets that rulers and clergy wanted buried. Discovery could mean imprisonment, torture, or worse. Their loyalty was tested constantly between obedience to their religious superiors and a moral imperative to bear witness through their unique craft. Many bell ringers lived in constant fear, their lives balancing precariously between sacred duty and dangerous defiance. The technology of bell ringing itself added layers to the mystery. Bells of different sizes and pitches could be struck in sequences, creating complex acoustic codes. The placement of bells in towers and chambers enhanced resonance, allowing messages to travel great distances. The art of bell ringing was both physical and intellectual, requiring mastery of rhythm and an intimate understanding of acoustic physics knowledge closely guarded and passed in secret within the brotherhood. As political regimes shifted and the power of the church waxed and waned, so too did the role of these bell ringers. In some areas, their signals became tools of resistance during uprisings. Their tolls, calling hidden communities to action or mourning fallen heroes. Elsewhere, the tradition faded into legend, replaced by overt proclamations or silenced entirely by modern communications. Today, echoes of their legacy remain in the pealing of old cathedral bells, but few realize the depths of meaning once encoded in those sounds. Their story reminds us that history is not just written in books or recorded in stone, but also in sound waves that carried messages of sorrow, courage, and defiance across centuries. The bell ringers, who only tolled for hidden deaths, offer a profound example of how human ingenuity finds expression even in the darkest times. Secret language forged from the necessity to speak when words were forbidden, to remember when silence was demanded, and to resist when open rebellion was impossible. Their story invites us to listen more closely to the sounds around us, to question what might be hidden in plain sight, and to honor those who risked everything to ring the bells of truth, even when their voices could not be heard. In a world where silence often serves power, these bell ringers became the whispered conscience of history, tolling for those whose lives and deaths were meant to be forgotten. This ancient brotherhood challenges us to recognize that sometimes the most profound messages are not shouted from the rooftops, but are hidden in the subtle tolls that echo through the ages, reminding us that justice, memory, and truth can endure, even in the quietest of sounds. Now, whenever you hear the solemn ringing of a distant bell, remember the secret bell ringers of the past who used their craft, not just to mark time, but to tell stories that must never be lost to silence. The bakers who delivered messages inside sacred communion bread, beneath the surface of daily village life in medieval Europe. Beneath the clatter of markets and the steady toll of church bells, there was a hidden network few ever suspected, one that used the most sacred object in Christendom as its conduit for rebellion. Tonight, we unravel the true story of the bakers who delivered messages inside sacred communion bread. A tale so improbable and secretive that only now are its fragments coming fully into light. These were not ordinary bakers, and the bread they baked was far more than a symbol of faith. In their hands, the Eucharist became a vessel of coded resistance, a channel for hope and warning, each batch forged in silence and guarded by the rhythms of daily ritual. To grasp the enormity of their risk, imagine the weight that communion bread held in the medieval mind. The Eucharist, believed by the faithful to become the literal body of Christ during Mass, was the most venerated element of worship and by anyone deemed unworthy, regulated by strict canon law, and watched over with the utmost reverence. Tampering with it was not just a crime against church and crown, but an act of cosmic treason. Yet, in the darkest corners of oppression, in eras when heresy was hunted and rebellion smothered, this bread became the only safe harbor for messages, too dangerous for any other route. The bakers who took on this hidden calling were, outwardly, the humblest of villagers. Most belonged to religious guilds, sworn to secrecy by oaths that echoed those of monastic orders. Their days began before dawn, hands kneading dough in the flickering glow of oil lamps, prayers whispered over flour and water. The routine of baking was itself a form of cover. Within these rituals, under the watchful gaze of both church and neighbor, the true work began. Selecting the most trusted apprentice, preparing the thinnest slivers of parchment, and writing out in minuscule cipher the rebel codes that would travel hidden inside the very bread that would be raised in the priest's hands at the altar. The genius of their method was in its simplicity. Medieval communion wafers were often paper-thin, baked in iron molds pressed with holy symbols, then stacked in batches for delivery to churches across the region. By inserting a sliver of parchment between two nearly transparent wafers, lightly brushed with water to seal them, a message could travel undetected into the heart of a guarded monastery, a besieged town, or even the fortress-like cathedrals of great cities. Only those trained in the secret priests, monks, or lay leaders involved in resistance knew how to break apart the wafer and retrieve the hidden script. Reading in silence and destroying all evidence before suspicion could arise, this network was not a fantasy but a response to the brutality of the era. Inquisitions raged. Secret police stalked dissidents. The penalty for possessing banned texts or forbidden news was death by burning, hanging, or slow torture. Yet the hunger for truth and freedom could not be stamped out. Historians now believe that many of the secret uprisings and the survival of forbidden books owe their success not just to bold leaders but to these anonymous bakers, whose courage went unnoticed for centuries. Village records and church archives, though often cryptic, provide rare glimpses into their world. In the late 14th century, during the peasant uprisings in England and the Hussite revolts in Bohemia, sudden flares of coordinated resistance puzzled royal authorities. No intercepted letter, no messenger on horseback could account for the speed at which secret commands seemed to pass from parish to parish, village to village. Later, Inquisition records mentioned priests arrested for consuming heresy at the altar, and bakers accused without clear evidence of profaning the host through unnatural means. In these accusations, historians now trace the shadow of a method so ingenious that it fooled the very powers designed to detect it. The ritual itself shielded the conspiracy. Communion bread was handled with ceremonial honor. Any intrusion by outsiders, be they soldiers or inquisitors, risked not just social uproar, but accusations of sacrilege. Inspecting each wafer for tampering was all but impossible, especially when the wafer molds were in the exclusive control of the baking guilds. Within these guilds, initiation was a matter of life and death. Only the most loyal, those with family ties or proven courage, were entrusted with the knowledge. Apprenticeship became not just a craft, but a crucible, where silence and trust outweighed even the skills of baking. Some candidates were tested with false missions or riddles to weed out spies. Others took their oaths before relics or in secret masses, binding their fate to the brotherhood forever. But the true power of their network was not simply in the act of hiding messages. It was in the creation of an invisible chain of trust, a relay of souls who risked everything for causes that ranged from survival to revolution. Through the passing of bread, information flowed in both directions. Warnings of approaching armies, calls for help, even coded confessions and instructions for secret worship all traversed this edible pipeline. Sometimes, entire passages from banned books, theological manifestos, verses of hope, or strategies for evading patrols were copied in tiny Latin script and dispatched under the noses of those who would have burned the sender alive. Yet, even in triumph, the bakers lived under perpetual threat. One careless word, a slip of the hand, or a single suspicious priest could doom the entire chain. There are recorded incidents of bakers vanishing overnight, their ovens cold, and their families questioned by local lords. Inquisitors, suspecting conspiracy, sometimes seized entire shipments of wafers, only to find nothing but unleavened bread. The most skilled of the Brotherhood adopted countermeasures, special symbols pressed into the wafer to indicate which batches were clean, double-layered molds to conceal extra messages, and even forged scripts to confuse any enemy who did manage to intercept a real code. The impact of their work is hard to measure, but echoes of it survive in the strangest places. Centuries later, explorers found old wafer molds hidden in church crypts, and fragments of parchment so thin they could only be read by candlelight. In more than one rebellion, local legends credit the bread of freedom for turning the tide. At crucial moments, a phrase that made little sense until scholars pieced together the stories of those who risked their souls to pass on a message in the body of Christ. What's most haunting about the story of these bakers is the combination of faith and subversion. The way an act meant for divine transformation became a vessel for the most human of hopes. To bake a wafer that could save a village or doom a tyrant was to gamble not just with earthly life, but with the eternal. Many of the bakers were driven by conscience, some by desperate need, and a few by a defiance that bordered on the mystical. For them, the act of baking became a liturgy of resistance, a silent sermon that, if uncovered, could bring the world crashing down on everyone they loved. Today, as we look back through the layers of time, the courage and ingenuity of these hidden bakers become almost tangible. Each loaf, each wafer was a prayer and a risk, a plea for deliverance, smuggled beneath a cloak of sanctity. Their craft, their silence, and their faith in one another ensured that the spark of rebellion and the promise of forbidden truth could survive the darkest centuries of repression. Next time you see a communion wafer lifted in a ceremony, remember that for hundreds of years, that simple circle of bread may have held within it a secret capable of toppling kingdoms or saving lives, messages not shouted, but delivered in silence, beneath the watchful eyes of both priest and persecutor. And so, the legacy of the bakers who delivered messages inside sacred communion bread endures, a reminder that history's most powerful revolutions often ride on the simplest acts of daily devotion. Their story calls us to listen for the hidden messages in our own world, and to never underestimate the courage that may lie in the most unexpected places. The candlemakers who controlled who slept and who stayed awake, of all the trades that quietly shaped the currents of medieval society. Few are as overlooked as the candlemakers, the keepers of sleep and wakefulness, the unseen of dreams, fear, and memory. In their flickering shadows, they held powers that even the most cunning alchemists and court physicians envied. This is not the story of ordinary wax and wick. This is a history drawn from the obscure corners of Europe's oldest cities and deepest forests. A story of secret recipes, subtle influence, and the profound anxieties of an age when darkness itself was a living, breathing threat. Imagine the world before the electric bulb, before even reliable glass windows. Night was not simply a time of rest, it was a territory of terror and wonder, where the boundaries between waking and sleeping were fragile, blurred by superstition and anxiety. The church bells might ring for vespers, but after sunset, all but the bravest or most desperate withdrew behind heavy doors, haunted by the threat of thieves, spirits, and the ever-possible return of plague. It was in this context that the art of candlemaking transformed into something more than a craft. The candle was not just a light, it was a vessel for intent, for magic, for the carefully controlled descent into sleep or its deliberate denial. The guilds of candlemakers had existed for centuries, jealously guarding their recipes. These recipes were anything but simple. The best wax was rendered from bees that fed only on certain wildflowers. Wicks were braided from linen, boiled with willow bark. Herbs, resins, and oils were steeped and strained, sometimes for years. It was these guilds, particularly in the trade centers of Venice, Ghent, and Paris, who discovered that their products could do much more than simply push back the dark. Through subtle changes, an extra pinch of poppy seed oil here, a dusting of henbane or valerian, there a candle could become an instrument of control. A dream candle, as whispered in the shadowed markets, could summon visions, banish nightmares, or keep a man locked in restless, fevered wakefulness until dawn. The science behind it would not be understood for centuries. The ways in which burning herbs release compounds that, inhaled in tiny amounts, cross the blood-brain barrier and alter human consciousness. But the effects were unmistakable. A nobleman who lit the wrong candle before a crucial meeting might find himself visited by tormenting dreams. So vivid and distressing, he awoke trembling, unable to trust his own judgment. An envoy negotiating a fragile peace might be gifted. As a mark of hospitality, a candle said to bring restful sleep, but instead spend the night in a half-lucid trance, waking, unsure whether he had been blessed or cursed. Nobles, of course, quickly learned to weaponize this craft. Candlemakers became the confidants and conspirators of courtiers, bishops, and even monarchs. Their shops were both feared and sought after, a place to commission a discreet batch for a guest's chamber, or to inquire, under a veil of secrecy, about remedies for insomnia, melancholy, or intrusive memories. There are records buried in the expense ledgers of royal courts of large sums paid not just for wax, but for special preparations, always described in vague, anxious terms. The methods of delivery were astonishingly sophisticated. Sometimes, a host would provide his guest with a beautifully ornate candle, set in a silver holder, to calm the mind after travel. The guest, unaware of the true contents, would inhale the subtle vapors for hours. In some cases, the scent was barely perceptibly a mere trace of sweetness, or a faint bitterness beneath the usual beeswax and rose. The next morning, the guest might awake with clear memories of long-lost faces, or with strange premonitions and anxieties that lingered through the day, affecting crucial decisions. But the manipulation of sleep was not always sinister. In some towns, the candlemaker guild was entrusted with the care of the dying, the mad, and the grief. Here, dream candles were used as a form of gentle euthanasia or comfort. A mother mourning a lost child might be gifted a candle infused with lavender, mugwort, and a hint of opium resin. To ensure she could rest, if only for a few hours, the terminally ill might receive candles to ease their passing, drifting into painless slumber surrounded by gentle scents. In plague years, candles were even believed to offer protection, not just through light, but through the cleansing power of burning aromatic herbs. Yet, for every story of mercy, there are rumors of much darker uses. Some chroniclers in the late Middle Ages speak of night candles smuggled into the bedsides of rivals and prisoners. The smoke would cloud the senses, making confessions easier to extract or dreams so disturbed that the victim's spirit was said to wither. Trials in the Inquisition period sometimes mention accused heretics found with herbal candles, suspected of using them to summon visions or commune with the devil. Of course, most such confessions were wrung out by torture, but the underlying fear was real, that a simple candle could undo a person's mind, or open their soul to things they did not want to see. The question arises, how did these secrets persist, and why did the candlemakers themselves not rise to more visible power? The answer lies in the unique position of their craft. Candlemakers worked in the margins, needed by all, trusted by few, and always watched. Their guilds were organized, with oaths of secrecy and internal policing. Apprenticeship was long and dangerous. Not every novice survived the exposure to poisonous herbs or the suspicion of witchcraft. Some guilds, especially in Central Europe, wove elaborate rituals around their recipes, disguising their true meaning behind prayers and parables, so that even within the guild, only a few ever knew the full truth. At the same time, the church kept a wary eye on the trade. Candles were essential for religious rituals, mass, vigils, and exorcisms all depended on their light. But the idea that a candle could influence the mind, or the soul, threatened official doctrine. The church alternately encouraged and suppressed the more esoteric aspects of the guild's knowledge. Some monasteries produced their own dream candles, using them to inspire visions in anchorites or to aid in the discipline of particularly tormented monks. Others denounced any deviation from pure beeswax as heresy. By the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, the trade began to fade into obscurity. As medical science advanced and new forms of entertainment displaced the collective terror of the night, still, traces of the old knowledge persisted. In the salons of Enlightenment France, it was fashionable to speak of the science of dreams and to experiment with herbal sleep aids, really acknowledging that these were little more than refinements of the medieval dream candle. Rural folk, traditions clung to the belief in candles that could draw out nightmares or grant visions of the dead. Even today, vestiges remain. Aromatherapy candles for calm, sleep, or lucid dreaming. All distant echoes of the candlemaker's secret art. So next time you light a candle in the quiet darkness, imagine just for a moment that the flame is more than a simple comfort. Imagine the centuries of hands, secrets, and intentions that went into making something as simple as a wick and a shell of wax. Recall that in a world ruled by shadows, the smallest light could guide you into sleep, shape your dreams, or keep you awake until morning, not by chance, but by design. In the hands of a guild that understood just how fragile and how powerful the border between sleep and waking truly was. The order that guarded a library no one ever admitted existed. Imagine walking through a medieval marketplace, crowded with the aromas of baked bread, wet earth, and sweat merchants shouting, coins clinking, the entire city alive with secrets. But there is something more here, something no one dares to speak about, not even in whispers. Somewhere beneath the centuries-old cobblestones, buried under ash and charred stone, lies the silent heart of a burned Abbeyarn Abbey that once stood as a sanctuary of learning, but was erased from all official memory. There, in the darkness beneath ruined cloisters, was hidden one of the most mysterious libraries in European history, a library that no living soul would ever admit had existed. This is the true story of the order that protected it, their dangerous rituals, and how the forbidden knowledge inside was never lost, only hidden, waiting for those bold or desperate enough to seek it. The medieval world was shaped as much by what people were forbidden to know as by what they were allowed to learn. Across Europe, abbeys and scriptoria were more than just places for prayer. They were the data centers, the archives, the engines of culture and control. But beneath the surface, running like a shadow parallel to the official church, were orders dedicated not to orthodoxy, but to the protection of dangerous knowledge. In the case of the abbey at the heart of our story, its end was public and violent, a catastrophic fire that devoured everything above ground. An accident blamed on lightning, or perhaps the wrath of God. But as the last embers cooled, a handful of survivors retreated not to grief, but to ritual. They locked themselves in silence and secrecy, swearing never to speak of what lay below. For beneath the charred stones was a labyrinth of hidden passages, carved not just for safety, but for the safeguarding of something far older and far more forbidden than even the church authorities realized. The collection beneath the abbey contained texts deemed heretical, magical, scientific, and political, 1,000 years of knowledge, collected in secret by monks who believed that truth was too dangerous to be left in the open. This was not just a library, it was a vault for the most controversial ideas of the age. Lost alchemical treatises, early medical manuscripts, banned translations of Greek and Arabic philosophy, even encoded records of royal scandals and crimes that could shatter kingdoms. The only thing more perilous than the books themselves were the men who protected them, an order that refused even to acknowledge its own existence. How did they manage this? The order's genius was in plain sight. After the fire, they blended back into society as beggars, scribes, and merchants. They infiltrated every level of the local economy, especially the bustling markets where information flowed as freely as coin. But here's where it gets strange. These men and women never met as a group, never signed anything, never left a single list or membership roll. Their communications were invisible, hidden in plain sight. They used ledgers, ordinary, day-to-day market books, the kind that no bishop or king would ever bother to check for secrets. But if you knew what to look for, you could find faint, near invisible markings in the margins, written in ink that would only appear under heat or with the right herbal solution. A ledger might show 10 sheep sold and 5 loaves of bread delivered, but a trained eye could read an entirely different message, a warning that an inquisitor was in town, a coded invitation to a midnight meeting, almost dangerously of all directions. To the hidden entrance of the library itself, the process of being found worthy by the order was both elaborate and chilling. If you were a scholar, a seeker, or someone desperate for knowledge forbidden by the authorities, you could not. Simply asked to be led to the library. The path began with silence weeks or months spent earning the trust of those who sold parchment or ink in the market. Being watched from afar, weighed and tested without ever realizing it. You might be asked an innocuous question by an old woman selling herbs, or be handed a loaf of bread marked with a curious sign. Only after many such encounters, after showing patience, wisdom, and, above all, discretion, might you be led to a particular stall in the market, where a ledger was presented to you without a word. There, with the right touch, you could reveal the ink that mapped your next steps, a trail of clues leading through ruined tunnels, past traps set for grave robbers, all the way to the unmarked soot-blackened door that guarded the last surviving memory of the abbey. Inside the library was a place out of time. Flickering candlelight revealed shelves of books bound in leather so old it crumbled to the touch. Scrolls sealed with wax stamped centuries before, and tables covered in instruments of learning, astrolabes, compasses, coded manuscripts. But this was no ordinary archive. The guardians watched in silence, never revealing their names, always ready to disappear at the first sign of intrusion. For centuries, the Order's existence was nothing more than rumor, a ghost story told among merchants and wandering scholars, a riddle that no one could solve twice. Some who entered the library left it shattered or mad, broken by the weight of truths the world was not ready to bear. Others vanished entirely, either absorbed into the Order or silenced to protect the secret. But the Order's purpose was not just secrecy, was stewardship. They understood something modern historians often forget, that knowledge is power, and power is peril. The books beneath the abbey were not kept hidden out of spite, but out of a hard-won recognition that the wrong words, in the wrong hands, could burn more than just buildings. They could incite revolts, shatter faith, topple dynasties. The Guardians weighed every seeker, not just for intelligence, but for motive. If you came seeking forbidden science to heal or enlighten, you might be allowed a single night within those walls, a chance to copy a passage or memorize a formula. But if your heart was full of ambition or vengeance, you would leave the tunnels empty-handed, haunted by the knowledge that something vast and dangerous had slipped just beyond your grasp. And so the centuries turned. Kings rose and fell, wars raged, new religions spread, but the library endured, never expanding, never contracting, held together by the fierce loyalty and unbreakable silence of its guardians. Not a single document surfaced to prove it ever existed. Not a single member of the Order ever confessed, not even on their deathbeds, to what they had seen or done beneath the abbey's ruins. Even when other lost libraries were rediscovered, when ancient texts turned up in far-off collections, when fragments were copied and recopied by later scholars, this particular Order remained a phantom in history. Its legacy carried only an rumors and the occasional strange gap in the record, an inventory that ended abruptly, a royal decree that vanished from the archives, a book referenced in a letter but never seen again. Some believe the Order died out at last, leaving nothing but ash and legend. Others insist the library was moved, piece by piece, to other hidden vaults across Europe, beneath a cathedral in Spain, a crumbling fortress in Bohemia, or even beneath the streets of Venice, where masked figures still trade secrets in silent code. But what matters most is not whether the library still exists, but what its story reveals about the nature of secrecy, memory, and power. The truth is, every society must decide what it will allow itself to remember and what it will force itself to forget. The Order beneath the abbey chose the harder path, to remember and to guard at any cost. So next time you find yourself among ancient ruins or reading an old ledger in a dusty archive, look closer at the margins. Run your fingers over the faintest marks. Think about the secrets that survived, not in grand monuments or royal decrees, but in silence, darkness, and invisible ink. The greatest libraries are sometimes the ones that no one will ever admit existed, watched over by those who understand that knowledge once unleashed can never be taken back. That is the true legacy of the Order, and the silent power of a library whose doors may still be waiting somewhere in the shadows. For those rare souls who are willing to risk everything in search of the forbidden page, the stonemasons who spoke to each other through echo traps in the shadowy veins of medieval Europe's most imposing castles. There ran a secret, not written in any official record, but instead spoken in the thinnest line between sound and silence. When you stand inside one of these ancient fortresses, you might sense it, a faint vibration under your feet, a whisper that never quite resolves into words, an echo that seems to linger just a moment too long in a distant corridor. To most, these are simply the tricks of cold stone and imagination. But in truth, these were the fingerprints of a clandestine brotherhood stonemasons who carved secret echo traps into the very bones of castles, creating chambers and passageways that could bend a whisper across impossible distances, carrying messages that only the initiated could send and receive. The history of the medieval stonemason is already one of whispered power and invisible legacy. These men, sworn to guild secrets, were responsible for the very lifeblood of Europe's stone architecture, from soaring cathedrals to fortress walls. Their skills were protected with more ferocity than gold, and for good reason. The knowledge of how to shape stone so it stood against time, weather, and siege was power itself. But beneath this overt mastery was another level of secret, one so subtle, so deeply encoded into the structures themselves, that even modern archaeologists sometimes debate its full extent. It began with the peculiar acoustics of stone. Medieval masons learned early that sound behaves in strange ways around solid, irregular walls and arches. They experimented in chapels, refectories, and crypts, noticing how a single spoken word could recurve with the right curves and hollows, travel farther than it had any right to. Over generations, this practical knowledge matured into something far more deliberate, a language of architecture, passed quietly from master to apprentice, never written down, always spoken, always sworn to secrecy under threat of exile, or, worse. Their most ingenious invention was the echo trapper-chamber, or hidden conduit, often no larger than a crawlspace, shaped to catch sound from a designated speaking corner and funnel it sometimes in defiance of apparent logic toward a distant listening corner. These spaces were neither marked nor obvious. They might be set behind a decorative pillar, or disguised as an alcove for a statue. Sometimes they ran inside the walls themselves, following routes that only a mason, familiar with the plans and the secret marks left in the mortar, would know existed. At their most complex, these echo traps could carry a soft murmur from one end of a castle to another, allowing a warning, an order, or a secret to be passed without a single letter, a single piece of parchment, a single risk of interception. Why go to such elaborate lengths? For the Masons, it was partly a matter of guild security. In an age when betrayal could mean ruin or death, when knowledge was both shield and sword, the ability to communicate in secret inside the heart of a powerful lord's castle was invaluable. But it was also a matter of survival and subtlety. Castles were hives of politics and paranoia, often crawling with spies loyal to rival lords or foreign crowns. If the Masons' loyalty was ever in doubt, or if they themselves needed to warn each other of danger, words carried through stone could travel where any letter might be intercepted, and where any trusted ear could turn traitor. The design of these echo traps required not just mathematical genius, but an intimate understanding of sound, how it bounces, muffles, or amplifies in stone. Masons would tap along unfinished corridors, listening for the way their hammers ring. Changed. They might test a chamber with a low hum, feeling where the vibration resonated strongest. In cathedral crypts and castle cellars, they built and rebuilt, chasing the perfect curve, the perfect angle, the perfect aperture. In some cases, these chambers even served double duty. They could disguise their real purpose as mere storerooms or drainage channels, but the initiated would know, by subtle marks, an unusual notch in the stone, a pattern of tool marks left like a signature, even a small symbol carved where only a mason's eyes would look. And so, a network was born not just of men, but of stone itself. When a castle's walls rose, so too did its veins. The unseen lines of communication reserved for those who truly understood their craft. There are tantalizing hints of how this network was used. In some chronicles, there are rumors of guards summoned to distant towers by a voice that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Of nobles who wondered how messages seemed to outrun their own fastest runners, of whispered warnings that reached a besieged garrison when every other line was cut. There are stories, too, of betrayal, of a mason revealing the echo traps to an invading army, and of that army finding themselves lost, misled by the very walls they thought they had conquered. In certain castles like England's Conway, Chateau de Vincennes, or the remote strongholds of the Teutonic Knights, modern archaeologists have found passages and chambers whose only purpose seems to be acoustic. A whisper in one corner is carried to a distant stairwell. A soft tap in a hidden passage can be heard in the Lord's private solar. To this day, some sites hold listening posts where the trick survives. You can speak at one wall, and the sound will travel to another, skipping rooms and corridors entirely. It's not magic, but the rigorous, practical sorcery of geometry and craft. What is most extraordinary is the way the Masons protected this knowledge not just from outsiders, but even from their own patrons. Lords and kings might pay for a castle, but they were never told every secret. The plans drawn for the master of the works might show a staircase, a vault, a great hall, but not the full extent of the inner spaces, the true dimensions of certain walls, or the reason a column was set just so. The Masons, sworn on pain of excommunication and guild banishment, held those truths among themselves, sometimes passing them down for centuries as family secrets. If you look at the graffiti left by Masons in ancient cathedrals' cryptic marks, stylized compasses and faces, you can glimpse their coded language, a silent record that survives even as the words themselves are lost. These echo traps were more than simple security measures. They were a symbol of the Masons' identity as both craftsmen and keepers of knowledge. At a time when most people lived and died never knowing how their own homes were built, the Masons inhabited a world of secret geometries, of codes hidden in plain sight, of alliances forged not just by oaths but by shared understanding of the very material beneath their hands. Their echo chambers were, in a sense, the physical embodiment of their power, invisible to the uninitiated, but vital, connective, alive. It's easy now to underestimate the power of such secrets. In our world of instant messages, encrypted phones, and digital surveillance, the idea of communicating through the arrangement of stone seems almost quaint. But in an age when a single word overheard could mean life or death, when an army could rise or fall based on a whispered warning, the Masons' echo traps were as advanced as any modern code. Over time, as castles fell out of use, and as new technologies for communication arose, messengers on horseback, coded letters, eventually telegraphs, the art of echo trapping faded from memory. Yet the traces remain, not just in the literal stones, but in the persistent mystery that surrounds so many ancient fortresses. When tourists walk the echoing halls of a ruined castle, or children shout into the curving walls of a cathedral and marvel at the return of their voices, they are, unknowingly, participating in an ancient ritual, testing the boundaries of space and sound, reaching across time to the Masons who once whispered secrets to each other when all the world was listening. So the next time you find yourself in a stone chamber and hear your own words returning from an unexpected angle, consider this: you are standing in the aftermath of a centuries-old conversation. You are eavesdropping, perhaps, on the ghost of a message that once meant everything to those who knew how to hear it. The Masons' secrets, written not in ink but in echo, remain beneath our feet, humming quietly beneath the weight of history, waiting, always, for the next voice willing to listen. The falconers who trained birds to spy on royal secrets. Tonight, we journey into the shadows above medieval Europe, where danger didn't always arrive on horseback or in the torchlight of midnight messengers. It descended from the sky on silent wings, carrying secrets in its feathers, vanishing before suspicion could even form. This is the untold story of the clandestine guild of falconers who trained hawks and falcons to spy on royal secrets. A true history, more cunning and sophisticated than legend. where the sky itself became a battlefield, and the most trusted couriers in Europe were neither man nor beast, but something in between. In the golden centuries of falconry, when kings flaunted their trained birds as living jewelry and nobles competed for the most exotic breeds, a hidden network exploited the world's obsession with raptors for an altogether darker purpose. Imagine a world where the line between game and espionage blurred, where the flutter of wings overhead could mean a royal hunt, or it could mean a coded message crossing enemy borders undetected. The origins of this secretive guild trace back to the crossroads of Central Asia and the Middle East, where falconry was born not only as a sport, but as a subtle art of war. Mongol Khans, Persian Shahs and Crusader knights alike recognized the unique advantage birds of prey could offer. But in the courts of Europe, falconers began to whisper among themselves, what if a bird could not only fetch game, but knowledge itself? What if its flight could be bent to serve as secret master crossing borders, perching in forbidden castles, even eavesdropping on unsuspecting royals? From these whispers, a covert order arose, one that would operate for centuries, their existence denied by official histories but betrayed by the uncanny regularity with which certain secrets seemed to travel. Training a bird for such dangerous work was both art and science. It began with the careful selection of a young hawk or falcon, chosen for intelligence, stamina, and an almost preternatural homing instinct. Over months, sometimes years, the bird was bonded to its handler, learning to return from incredible distances with unerringed loyalty. But these birds were also conditioned to ignore the lures and signals of other falconers, to shun food from strange hands, and to seek out specific visual markers, often unique flags, ribbons, or perches only the guild could recognize. The true genius, however, lay in the method of message delivery. Ordinary couriers might carry letters in false-bottomed saddles or hidden seams, but birds could not be searched in the same way. Instead, the guild developed a system of signals, woven into the tail feathers themselves, tiny knots, threads of dyed silk, or minuscule carvings that, to an untrained eye, seemed like natural variations in plumage. Each combination carried its own meaning. The number of knots might indicate a royal death. A twist in the thread might warn of an impending invasion. A drop of red wax, sealed in a feather's shaft, could mean a plot had succeeded or failed. These birds became airborne shadows, gliding over battlefields, fortress walls, and bustling markets, never arousing suspicion among those below. Royal courts became obsessed with keeping their windows and battlements guarded. Yet few realized that their deepest secrets might be carried away by a bird resting momentarily on a rooftop or fluttering through a garden. The falconers themselves were masters of disguiseophan, posing as wandering bird trainers, court entertainers, or even merchants. Their guild was bound by fierce loyalty and ruthless secrecy, enforcing silence with the promise of wealth or the threat of utter ruin. Some of history's greatest mysteries, scholars now believe, may have been shaped by these silent couriers. How did rebels in besieged cities coordinate surprise attacks, just as enemy defenses weakened? Why did exiled princes in distant lands always seem to know when it was safe to return? The records, scarce and always indirect, point to a network of falconers who crisscrossed Europe and the Near East, offering their skills to the highest bidder or to causes they believed just. Kings and emperors, desperate for an edge, sometimes recruited these masters of the sky, only to discover their loyalties were impossible to truly own. Evidence survives in the margins of court documents, references to suspicious bird flights, unexplained signals cited on castle walls, reports of falconers arrested and tortured, yet refusing to name their patrons. In one case, a royal falconer in service to the French crown was executed after a captured hawk was found to have a silk thread tied in a complex knot deciphered too late, as a warning of a double agent in the king's retinue. In another, English chroniclers grumbled about foreign birds haunting the skies over London, their queer tail markings coinciding with the sudden leaking of state secrets. The true power of the Falconers Guild was their invisibility. In a world where written messages could be intercepted and human spies betrayed, The bird seemed above suspicion, its loyalty unquestioned, its movements easily explained. The greatest threat to the guild came not from enemies, but from the unpredictable nature of their own couriers. Birds could be blown off course, killed by rival raptors, or captured by hunters ignorant of their real purpose. The guild developed elaborate fallback signals, secondary birds, false trails, and decoy messages to confound any who thought they might pierce the system. For all their cunning, the Falconers walked a razor's edge between glory and doom. Those caught faced torture, exile, or execution. Some disappeared into dungeons, others became legendary figures shrouded in rumor. Their names invoked in hushed tones by those who feared the silent approach of wings in the night. Yet for all its risk, the system endured for generations. The collapse of old empires, the shifting of borders, the rise and fall of dynasties saw the guild adapt, reinvent, and persist. By the dawn of the modern age, when firearms and paper replaced bows and birds, the last great falconers vanished into legend. Yet, in the quiet backrooms of certain European towns, old guild ledgers survive. And in remote castles, weathered perches and cryptic feathers hint at a time when the greatest secrets in the world could be carried on a single breath of wind. This was the legacy of the falconers who trained birds to spy on royal secrets. They remind us that history's most profound revolutions are sometimes invisible, played out, not in the clash of armies, but in the silent shadow of wings across a clouded sky. And even now, as we look up, it is tempting to wonder what secrets might still ride the wind, just beyond the reach of those who believe themselves masters of the earth below. The Bookbinders, who sewed traps into knowledge itself, picture an age when knowledge was as deadly as a dagger. When every page, every stitched seam, could be a line between enlightenment and demise. In the labyrinthine streets of late medieval Europe, there existed a brotherhood of bookbinders whose hands were stained with more than ink. They were artisans, yes, but also engineers of secrecy, paranoia, and subtle defense. These were the craftsmen to whom the most forbidden manuscripts were entrusted, not merely to be hidden, but to be guarded in a way so cunning that the book itself became a living trap, a device built as much for harm as for preservation. In an era defined by the ceaseless war between faith, science, and the shadowy world of courtly intrigue, books became objects of obsession and terror. Every noble, alchemist, and ambitious monk desired a copy of a prescribed text, and diagrams, lost treatises of Greek logic, forbidden grimoires, or the heretical musings of vanished philosophers. But the greatest fear was not that these books would simply be read, but that their knowledge would fall into the wrong hands. Rival guilds, greedy monarchs, or the ever-watchful Inquisition. The answer was a new kind of craftsmanship binding that concealed not just words, but weapons. The bookbinders' workshops smelled of leather, acid, and the faintest tang of metal. Hidden in shadow, away from prying eyes, they developed techniques that made every manuscript a potential snare. Fine wires, thin as hair, sharp as needles, were woven into the spines and covers. To the casual eye, the book was nothing more than a volume of prayers or a merchant's ledger, but one false Movan, eager hand opening to the wrong page. A curious eye prying beneath the end paper, and a slender thread might slice flesh or puncture skin. Sometimes, the threads were coated in toxins, rare plant-based poisons that would leave no mark except a feverish illness days later. Deaths that appeared natural or unexplained. But it was the ink itself that harbored the most insidious danger. Secret societies within the guild discovered formulas for slow-acting venoms, invisible under candlelight, their full potency awakened only by the heat of a reader's breath or the moisture of their fingers. Unsuspecting thieves, spies, or informers might pore over a forbidden page, absorbing a fatal dose without knowing, falling ill, delirious, or dead days after stealing what was never meant for them. Each book was a riddle layered with defense, every mechanism designed to punish the uninitiated. Some tomes required a precise ritual to unlock a sequence of pressure on the binding, a whispered phrase, a particular angle of light. Others held tiny spring-loaded blades within false compartments, or thin vials of ink that shattered and bled into the pages if the wrong thread was pulled, rendering the text unreadable for all time. In some cases, a cipher within the margins would instruct the true reader on how to disarm the trap, while the ignorant would be left to their doom. The legacy of these binders is found in scattered accounts writings of inquisitors who perished mysteriously, stories of rivals who wasted away after laying hands on a rival's ledger, and legends among scholars who would pass a book from one hand to the next as if it were a venomous snake. There are records of entire libraries purged after a single deadly manuscript was opened by the wrong hands. Even centuries later, archivists have discovered remnants, bits of corroded wire in antique bindings, traces of copper, arsenic in illuminated pages, hidden sketches in binding boards that map out the mechanisms of self-destruction. And so, the act of reading in those times was not only a quest for understanding, but an act of courage. Every scholar who dared open a forbidden codex did so with trembling fingers, eyes wide for the faintest shimmer of metal or discoloration. Knowledge, in this secret world, was not passively guarded behind locked doors, it fought back, punishing the unworthy, rewarding only those who had truly earned the trust of its makers. As the centuries turned, the memory of these lethal books faded into rumor, their dangers dismissed as legend by the unwary. Yet even now, in dusty vaults and silent monasteries, a few such volumes remain, silent, waiting, each one an echo of a world where the written word could kill as surely as a blade. The true history of the Bookbinders Guild is a reminder. Some knowledge is defended not by walls, but by the traps sewn into the very fabric of the page. The shepherds who used star patterns to pass rebellion plans across the midnight fields of medieval Europe, where the silence was only broken by the far-off bark of a dog, or the rustle of sheep's wool in tall grass. An invisible network was at work. This was a world without telegraphs, without coded letters or radiozet. Rebellion still lived and moved under the nose of every watchful lord and knight. In the darkness, shepherds became more than simple tenders of flocks. By night, they became mapmakers and messengers, guiding their herds in patterns that could be read like the constellations above, in the spaces between stars, and in the drifting silhouettes of sheep across a moonlit field. Entire blueprints for revolt could pass, unseen, across vast distances, timed perfectly to the rhythm of the night sky. Imagine standing on a lonely hilltop in the dead of night, a crook in hand, the cold wind tangling your cloak. Above you, the constellations turn, slowly the bear, the hunter, the dragon, all silent and immutable. But here, on Earth, the shepherd's task is more complex than it seems. For centuries, these humble figures were thought to be little more than outcasts, barely better than vagrants. But the truth is, shepherds knew every curve of the land, every hidden hollow and secret pass. And in times of unrest, when kings pressed their boots harder into the backs of the poor shepherds, became the eyes, ears, and silent hands of rebellion. At the heart of this system was a language written not in words, but in motion. Shepherds would guide their flocks by torch or subtle whistle, arranging sheep across pastures in specific shapes, clusters, or lines. From a distant tower or hillside, and a light trained in the code could read the flock's positions as messages. Perhaps a triangle meant to gather at a certain well after dusk. A loose spiral might warn of danger. A straight line would mean wait. These patterns mimicked constellations, so if a patrol asked, the shepherds could feign ignorance. I simply walked where the sheep wished to graze. The stars provided plausible deniability, and the lords above rarely questioned the illiterate. Poor on the science of the heavens. Timing was everything. Shepherds used star rise and set as both clock and code. Rebellion plans moved with the arc of the sky, a message sent as the dog star crested the horizon, or an order to strike as Orion's belt stood at its zenith. The shepherds became, in effect, living astrolabes, counting time not by bells but by the slow parade of light overhead, by training flocks to respond to subtle signals, claps, whistles. Even the movement of a lantern behind a stone wall. Shepherds could, over weeks or months, pass vital instructions to rebels hiding across the countryside. Their communication could not be intercepted. No ink to smear, no letter to betray them. Some lords and clergy noticed the strange movement of flocks at night. Rumors spread about shepherds practicing sorcery, or worshipping false gods by arranging their sheep into star-like sigils. In reality, the only gods these shepherds served were hope and survival. In times of revolt, when armies approached or tax collectors scoured the villages, the shepherds' signals became ever more urgent and complex. They timed their actions to new moons or clouded skies, knowing that darkness was their best ally. The same sheep that fed the lords, tables and clothed their backs, now became living pieces on a secret chessboard, one move ahead of the oppressor. Records from rural France, Wales, and the highlands of Spain hint at how deep this practice ran. Shepherd guilds, bound by secret oaths, trained young members in star reading and flock guiding. In isolated mountain valleys, entire generations grew up fluent in the silent code. Their families protected by the wisdom of the sky and the careful watch of the oldest shepherds. Some uprisings succeeded because of it. Battles were joined on nights when the constellations were right. Ambushes sprung when a certain sheep formation passed beneath a known hilltop. When rebellion failed, the code faded into legend. No parchment or artifact left behind, just whispers among the stones. The legacy endures in folktales of shepherds who called down the stars or spoke to each other in the silence of night. But beneath the poetry, there is an enduring truth. In a world ruled by those who thought power was a matter of steel and parchment, the greatest weapon of the humble was their patience, their observation, and their willingness to trust the night sky. The story of the shepherds who used the stars to pass rebellion plans is a story of courage, of secret alliances, and of the endless ingenuity of those who dared to dream of freedom even when the only map was drawn in wool and starlight. The order that disguised meeting places as abandoned wells in the ancient landscape of medieval Europe, where suspicion ran as deep as any well, and every stone seemed to hold a secret. There existed an order whose true history was almost entirely erased by time itself. Their council chambers were never built above ground, and no records listed their names. They thrived precisely because their existence remained a rumor, a whisper, a shadow that clung to the forgotten places everyone else avoided. They were known only by the scars they left on stone, and by the faded memory of a meeting place that no one truly believed existed. The abandoned well. Imagine a village at dusk, the kind with crooked timber beams, where every face is known but every heart is guarded. In the center of that village, or perhaps just at its edges, there would be a well, one that had dried up long ago. Stones blackened by time and moss, the lip cracked, weeds tangled around the rim. Children were warned not to go near, not because the well was dangerous, but because it was haunted by rumors older than anyone alive. Some said a woman had drowned there. Others swore it was cursed, ground, and still others, older and wiser, said nothing at all. For those who belonged to the order, this silence was a kind of invitation. You must picture this. The night air is thick, the moon is hidden by clouds, and a figure approaches the abandoned well. There are no torches, no shouts. The figure kneels, feeling along the rim for a particular stone marked by a series of shallow grooves. These grooves are a code, meaningless to everyone else, but to members of the order, it is a language, a sign that the council chamber is ready. The figure presses the stone, and, with a careful twist, lifts a false cover from within the well. The opening is revealed, and a silent descent begins. Rope ladders, old iron rungs, or even spiral steps carved directly into the stone. Each well had its own method, its own architecture, carefully constructed by hands that would never reveal their trade. Beneath the ground, the world changes. Here, in the cold darkness, a chamber opens up, dug out generations before. Walls are lined with chalk marks, secret glyphs, and symbols of protection. The chamber is dry, silent except for the soft whisper of cloaks brushing against stone. The members gather, their faces hidden by hoods. There is no light except the faintest glow from lamps hidden deep within the rock, their flames fed by oil kept safe in clay jars. No one speaks until the ritual stone carried in and set upon a pedestal, is revealed. Only then do the conversations begin? But what did they talk about? This is where the Order's true danger lay, not in weapons or armies, but in ideas. These were places of forbidden thought, places where philosophy, science, and dissent were allowed to breathe. In a world where heresy was punishable by fire, where rulers feared rebellion more than famine, these chambers became laboratories of resistance. Alchemists whispered about the nature of matter. Priests argued about the soul. Farmers, masons, scribes all debated the rules that governed their lives. The injustices they endured, the futures they dreamed of but could never speak of above ground. How did such an order survive? The answer lies in the very nature of the well itself. Wells were everywhere, and abandoned wells were so common that no one thought twice about them. Their very invisibility was their protection. The Order left no written records, only marks on stone, codes passed by word of mouth, rituals embedded in the most ordinary gestures. If a meeting was betrayed, the chamber could be collapsed, filled in, lost for generations. Sometimes, after a raid or a betrayal, only a single marker-carved circle, a crescent moon, a triangle with a dot would remain, a clue for the next generation to dig anew. Legends grew around these wells. Some spoke of ghosts that defended them, others said wells that once bubbled with water now held only secrets. That if you listened carefully at night, you could hear voices echoing up from the dark. These stories were, in their way, camouflage. As the centuries turned, the Order's influence spread. Ideas that were born in darkness eventually crept into daylight, new ways of organizing, new technologies, even the seeds of revolution. Rulers would later wonder where such dangerous ideas had come from, never realizing that beneath their feet, in the ruins they dismissed, entire movements had taken root. Archaeologists today sometimes stumble upon sealed chambers beneath ruined wells, finding clay tablets or fragments of ritual stones. Most never understand what they are seeing. To them, these are just forgotten storage spaces or collapsed root cellars. But, in rare cases, a symbol is recognized, a glyph, matching a pattern found hundreds of miles away, carved by hands long dead, connecting disparate villages in a secret network. Each well was a node, each chamber a pulse in a heartbeat of resistance that spanned generations. To understand this order is to understand a fundamental truth of history. The most powerful changes do not begin in sunlight, in palaces, or in grand cathedrals. They begin in the dark, in hidden places, in the quiet resolve of people who risk everything, not for glory, but for the freedom to think, to question, to dream. The abandoned well, for them, was never truly abandoned. It was the start of something that could not be drowned, could not be buried, no matter how many times the stone was rolled back into place. In every forgotten ruin, every dry well that once echoed with the voices of the forbidden, you can still feel the pulse of their defiance. If you listen closely enough, their history lives on, in silence, beneath the surface. The forgers, who used melted wax to reverse royal orders in the forgotten underbelly of medieval courts. Far from the pageantry of processions and the iron grasp of royal authority, a silent war was waged, one that pitted absolute power against a clandestine league of forgers who used the simplest tool imaginable, melted wax. This is the true story of the underground guild that specialized in reversing sealed royal orders. An almost invisible resistance that rewrote destinies, saved lives, and toppled fortunes, all with the turn of a heated spoon and the knowledge of a stamp's secret flaws. Their legacy is hidden not in monuments or chronicles, but in the subtle fingerprints of history, the missing execution, the sudden pardon, the order that never reached its intended target, all quietly rewritten by hands unseen. To understand the magnitude of their operation, you must first appreciate the power of the royal seal. In an age when literacy was rare and communication slow, the king's word was made real in wax-a-molten imprint pressed with the signet of sovereign will. A royal decree, a death warrant, a land grant, or exile were given force by that colored blob, set hard and shining on parchment. It was believed to be unbreakable, proof against tampering and fraud. The closest thing the medieval mind had to an inviolable contract. Any hint of forgery was treason of the highest order, punishable by torture and death. Yet it was precisely in this overconfidence that the forgers found their opening. The members of this guild were no ordinary criminals. They were artisans, alchemists, and former scribes, some trained in monasteries, others in the forges and workshops that supplied the king himself. Their skills were passed in secret, often through coded recipes and whispered lessons behind locked doors. Many began as simple notaries or waxworkers, but somewhere along the line, they learned to read the hidden weaknesses in a royal seal, a slight flaw in the signet's edge, a bubble in the wax, a color shade only a master could replicate. Their work began with the dangerous art of acquiring the original seal or an impression of it. Some had access through bribery servants in the royal chancery, kitchen boys, even the apothecaries who supplied wax for the court. Others created intricate fakes, spending months perfecting a duplicate signet using nothing but candle soot, soft clay, and hours of patient labor. But the true genius lay in what happened next. When a decree arrived, sealed with the fate of a noble, a commoner, or an entire village, the forger would carefully soften the wax, never enough to melt the details, just enough to pry it from the parchment without cracking. With steady hands, they would lift the seal, alter the order's contents, sometimes a single name, a changed date, a reversed command, then replace the wax, pressing it back into place so flawlessly that even the sharpest clerk could not tell. Some devised methods to remold the softened seal, subtly altering its features to signify a change in command, a secret message only the next forger would recognize. In a world without carbon copies or typewriters, a single reversed order could mean life or death. A knight en route to execution might instead find himself pardoned at the last moment. A village marked for taxation could receive sudden relief. A loyal spy ordered home for arrest might instead receive a warning and vanish before the noose closed. The risk was enormous. Forgers lived on the edge, hunted by the king's men, trusted by few, sometimes double-crossed by those they helped. Yet the guild endured for generations, operating in cellars beneath scriptoriums, in the back rooms of taverns, and in the shadowy corners of monasteries. They developed codes and rituals of trust. One guild was rumored to use a secret sign, a fingerprint in red wax, to identify each other. Some forgers passed their knowledge only to bloodkin, while others sought apprentices who had already lost everything to royal decree. Men and women with nothing left to lose. Their work influenced not just individuals, but the fates of kingdoms. During civil wars and religious purges, entire lines of succession were altered by forged or reversed orders. Records from the Wars of the Roses hint at pardons and executions that defy logic. Historians now suspect the silent touch of these master forgers. In the courts of Spain and France, documents exist that bear the unmistakable marks of altered seal signs of a decree once hot from the king's signet, then cunningly recast in the firelight of a rebel's workshop. Yet for all their success, the forgers remained ghosts. Their triumphs were measured not in monuments, but in the absences they created. The body never hanged, the fortune never seized, the order never enforced. They asked for no credit, because fame was a death sentence. Their only legacy is the subtle peace they brokered, the chaos they delayed, the lives they turned from the brink, with nothing more than silence, heat, and skill. As the centuries turned and the world moved toward bureaucracy and printed documents, the old guilds faded. But in the secret drawers of antique desks, in the layered wax of royal archives, their work remains a testament to the power of those who, with patience and daring, could reverse the very will of a king. Their story lingers in every melted seal and altered parchment, a reminder that history is never as unbreakable as it seems, and that even the smallest tool in the right hands can quietly rewrite the fate of nations. The pilgrims who walked in circles to seal forgotten oaths. For most of us, the idea of pilgrimage conjures visions of endless roads stretching from the edges of civilization toward distant shrines, with each footstep a movement toward redemption or revelation. But what if I told you that, hidden within medieval Europe's tangled landscape, there existed pilgrim orders whose journeys never followed the straight path? Instead, these pilgrims walked in spirals, tracing ancient patterns into the earth, rituals more secretive and symbol-laden than any written law, designed not just to reach a holy place, but to seal oaths and encode forgotten alliances at every turn. Their steps marked not only the ground, but the very structure of power and memory across the centuries. In the shadow of the great cathedrals, and within the quiet boundaries of sacred groves, these spiral-walking pilgrims belonged to brotherhoods and sisterhoods that history has largely erased. Yet the traces remain carved into stones beside rivers, in labyrinths hidden beneath moss and bramble, and in the whispered stories of those who saw circles where others saw chaos. The origins of this practice lie in the ancient world, where the spiral was a universal symbol of cycles, death's return, the unseen thread binding past to future. For these pilgrims, walking in circles was never aimless. Each spiral mapped the territory of a vow, a contract made not on parchment but on living soil. To step inside a spiral was to enter a pact, sealed by movement and memory, unbreakable as long as the pattern endured. Unlike typical pilgrimages, these journeys could last for days, even weeks, with participants circling sacred stones, burial mounds, or hidden wells. At each curve, the leader would recite part of an oath, words forgotten by common law, preserved only in the act of walking. Every turn of the spiral encoded a piece of secret knowledge, laws regulating ancient alliances, obligations between rival houses, or the invisible rules keeping peace between warring towns. As they walked, the pilgrims counted the steps, each number with its own meaning, each direction determined by tradition or the will of a forgotten ancestor. Sometimes, a spiral was walked to renew an alliance that could never be spoken aloud. Two noble families might send representatives to a lonely meadow at dawn. There, under the guise of prayer, they'd walk the spiral together, turning in silence, sealing a bond that outlasted wars, marriages, even the rise and fall of kingdoms. The spirals themselves became a hidden language. Outsiders saw only strange tracks in the grass or labyrinthian markings on the church floor. But to the initiated, every loop, every crossing, meant something precise: a forgotten boundary restored, a truce reaffirmed, or a promise to hide a fugitive child until danger passed. Over time, the church itself absorbed some of these customs, building stone labyrinths at the entrances of cathedrals, inviting pilgrims to walk them in meditation. But the original orders kept their deeper secrets. In times of war or persecution, spiral journeys became a tool of resistance. Messages could be passed by walking a spiral in reverse, or by pausing at a certain turn signaling danger, or offering shelter to those in exile. The oaths sealed on these paths were taken with deadly seriousness. To betray one was to risk exile, ruin, or worse. Chroniclers tell of lords who vanished after breaking a spiral oath, their names erased from the family line. Yet the rituals continued, evolving with the centuries. Even as new laws erased old borders and new faiths swept across the land, the spiral walkers endured, adapting, passing their codes from elder to apprentice, generation to generation. The memory of these circles lingers in folk festivals, in dances that spiral round a fire, in the labyrinths found in ruined abbeys or the center of old villages. Some say the spiral still has power, that to walk it, with intention, is to awaken the old oaths, to call back the memory of alliances that once held the world together. The pilgrims who walked in circles may be gone, but the marks of their secret journeys remain. Quiet evidence of a time when loyalty was written in footsteps, not ink, and the earth itself remembered the vows that kept history from vanishing into dust. The organ builders who hid codes in the pipes they tuned in the vast candlelit cathedrals of medieval Europe, where every stone seems to hold a whisper and every arch is heavy with centuries of secrets. There is a kind of magic that few ever suspect. It isn't in the stained glass or the illuminated manuscripts, nor even in the hidden crypts beneath the altar. The true mystery, for those with ears trained to listen and hearts strong enough to pursue forbidden answers, lives in the music itself, specifically, in the mighty pipes of the cathedral organ. A machine so complex and haunting that it was said only angels or madmen could truly master its voice. But there was something else, something even priests and kings did not know. Certain melodies played at midnight, when the world outside was silent and the cathedral stood in shadow, could unlock secrets hidden, not just in stone, but in sound. Behind these impossible wonders stood the secretive guild of organ builders, masters of wood and metal. Yes, but also of codes, rituals, and unbreakable oaths. Their hand-shaped pipes from rare alloys, each cut and bent to a formula that no apprentice could learn without years of silent trust. Their workshop was not merely a place of labor, but a sanctum for designs that would never be written down. Each organ, from the smallest parish instrument to the thunderous behemoths in grand cathedrals, was more than a tool of worship. It was a labyrinth of resonances, an encrypted message left for those who could decode music itself. This guild's secret was astonishing. Within the arrangement and precise tuning of organ pipes, they embedded patterns, musical codes that only a select few could interpret. Some of these patterns were mathematical riddles, sequences of notes that echoed ancient numerology or mirrored forgotten astronomical cycles. But the most powerful codes were designed for a darker, more practical purpose. Play a certain melody, a sequence nearly impossible for the uninitiated to stumble upon by accident, and a resonance would vibrate through the stone, shifting a hidden mechanism deep within the walls. Suddenly, a panel in the sacristy would slide aside, revealing a passage leading to lost relics or forbidden texts. Sometimes, the code would trigger the release of a locked chest, the start of a hidden clockwork automaton, or even the secret passage of a crypt meant to stay sealed until Judgment Day. For centuries, the existence of these codes was denied, whispered only among the most trusted members of the guild. Organists who knew the patterns could pass information from city to city without a single word, carrying knowledge that could topple a bishop or save a heretic from the stake. During midnight masses, when the cathedral was nearly empty and the air thrummed with the tension of unspoken faith, a single chord might act as a Sinan invitation, a warning, or a command that only those with the right training would hear. There are stories, preserved in the letters of traveling monks and the diaries of nervous bishops, of doors found open without explanation, crypts discovered empty, and relics vanishing or appearing after a mysterious melody was heard echoing through the nave. The creation of these resonance codes required genius bordering on obsession. Builders experimented for years to find the precise harmonics that could shake loose a stone or trigger a hidden spring without being detected by those outside the conspiracy. Some of the oldest cathedrals still bear scars from failed experiments, cracked pillars, warped choir stalls, even legends of haunting when, in fact, the only spirit present was the music itself, vibrating at a frequency that only the wise, or the damned, could hear. With each generation, the guild's secrets grew harder to protect. Rival builders tried to copy the codes, sometimes succeeding, often triggering disaster. Organists were pressured, even tortured, for their knowledge. Still, the true patterns, never written, only sung, hummed, or memorized, survived, guided by a lineage of builders who believed the cathedral organ was not merely an instrument, but a key to the entire architecture of the sacred and the profane. Today, most of these codes are lost. The mechanisms they controlled, corroded or forgotten behind centuries of plaster and stone. But sometimes, late at night, an organist will play an ancient melody and swear they hear a panel shift, a door click, a draft of air where none should exist. Maybe it's imagination, or maybe it's the echo of the old guild's oath, a reminder that music at its most secretive is not only a language of the soul, but a code that can open the doors between worlds. The gravediggers who buried messages instead of the dead equals beneath the world's oldest cemeteries, where moss clings to broken stones, and the names have long been erased by rain. A hidden war once raged in silence. Among the rows of lopsided graves and faded epitaphs, the night's truest secrets did not sleep with the dead, but instead were guarded by the Linger, Brotherhood of Gravediggers, whose work had little to do with corpses and everything to do with messages, warnings, and subterfuge. This was not the story of haunted graveyards or restless spirits, but of a clandestine network that risked everything for the living, using death as the perfect camouflage. In troubled regions where kings and priests wielded suspicion like a blade, where a whisper could mean arrest or disappearance, the graveyard was not just an end, but a crossroads. The gravediggers, men who were trusted by no one but known by all, became the silent allies of resistance. Their days were spent under the weary gaze of mourners and clergy, but their nights belonged to a different world. When a body was expected in a remote corner, sometimes it was never delivered at all. Instead, the gravediggers placed a sealed jar deep within the earth. The lid waxed shut, its contents known only to a select few. Inside these jars were not ashes or tokens of the dead, but parchment or wax tablets, hidden in darkness. One message might be a warning of a coming raid, another a list of names falsely recorded as deceased, protecting families from the authorities. Sometimes, the jars held coded maps for safe passage out of town, or confessions meant to exonerate the innocent. The gravediggers developed their own scripts, symbols, and knots layers of secrecy that would baffle any intruder. If the wrong person dug where they shouldn't, all they would find was a jar smeared with resin and dirt, easily dismissed as old ritual or superstition. The art of burial became an art of deception. The records kept by the church or manor would list the grave as occupied, the prayers said, the mourners led away by candlelight. In truth, those who were supposed to be buried might be hiding in a nearby cellar, or already halfway across the border, their death recorded for the protection of those left behind. In times of plague or persecution, this deception saved hundreds. The dead made room for the living's last hope. Gravediggers worked in pairs, trusting only those who shared their oath. Night after night, they honed rituals to avoid suspicion. Falls weeping, quiet shoveling, the careful replanting of sod, to erase every trace. If an overseer asked too many questions, the Brotherhood might bury a decoy jar filled with sand or herbs, buying time until the threat passed. In some towns, even the bell ringer and the village healer joined the cause, turning the graveyard into a coded map of resistance, with certain plots marked for those in the know. The greatest challenge was secrecy. Gravediggers often lived as outcasts, their touch considered unlucky. This very stigma became their shield. No one wished to follow a digger into the dark. No one listened too closely to the whispers of men, whose hands smelled of earth and old sorrow. Their knowledge of the graveyard's geography was absolute. They knew where water pooled, where the oldest stones crumbled, which roots would reveal a recent dig. In times of crisis, even the bravest rebels relied on the digger's skill. One false move could betray dozens. Not all messages were warnings. Sometimes a jar held a false confession, meant to throw the authorities off a fugitive's trail. Sometimes it was hope itself, a poem, a family's final goodbye, or the name of a lost love, hidden where only time would find it. For centuries, such jars have surfaced, unearthed in abandoned churchyards, marked with strange symbols or initials. Their scripts a mystery to all but the dead, and those who risked everything to cheat the grave. When the authorities began to suspect, the Brotherhood adapted. They buried jars beneath older graves, deep within crypts, or in the roots of ancient trees where no one would dare dig. Some legends speak of entire cemeteries mapped by code, each stone a point in a larger web of secrets. The gravediggers were never caught, not all of them, not together, because their work was patience, and their greatest ally was the fear of the grave itself. What remains, centuries later, are rumors and scattered finds, sealed vessels, hidden scrolls, stories whispered on the wind among the moss and the crumbling stones. The Brotherhood has faded, but the lesson lingers. In the world's darkest hours, hope sometimes travels, not by messenger or pigeon, but beneath the ground, silent, unyielding, waiting for the right hands to bring it to light once more. The children trained to speak only in shadow language. There are stories in medieval history that live in the cracks between legend and silence. Tales so strange that even the most skeptical historians pause and wonder if a single detail, a single whisper, could possibly be true. Among the most haunting of these is the story of the children trained to speak only in shadow language, a code born not of words, but of silence and movement, invisible to any outsider, a lifeline of secrets, passed through feuding noble courts. It begins, as so many secret histories do, with war. Lords and kings, desperate to outmaneuver each other, craved a way to send messages without detection. Yet the greatest threat was never a traitor or a spy, but a message that could be seen or overheard. So, somewhere between the walls of an orphanage and the stone corridors of castles, a new kind of messenger was invented, the child who knew no words. Imagine growing up in a world where language is forbidden, not just spoken words, but any sign, any written letter, any accidental whisper. This orphan circle was carefully selected, gathered from lost villages, battlefields, and the ruins of plague. From the moment they could crawl, they were taught to communicate not by mouth or pen, but by the movements of their hands, the tilt of their bodies, the shifting of shadows on the wall. Every gesture carried meaning. Every flicker of the lamp, every silhouette cast in candlelight, was a word in a language only they could speak. These children lived together, yet learned to be invisible to outsiders. Their very existence doubted by those who didn't know what to look for. They would gather in cellars at dusk, arranging themselves against torchlit walls, practicing the ancient art of speaking in silhouette. To them, a raised arm might mean danger. The slow, deliberate curl of a finger might reveal a name, a threat, or a warning. Shadows merged and separated, forming sentences and entire stories that not even the sharpest spy could overhear. It is hard for us now to imagine how profound this secrecy was. In a medieval world, where written documents could be intercepted and voices betrayed under torture. A language with no words left, no evidence. Even if these children were captured, their secrets could not be forced out. Their memories were trained, not to store information in language, but in the instinctive muscle memory of movement and the subtle geometry of light and darkness. And so, messages traveled across kingdoms. From a lord's shadowed study to a distant alley's hidden chamber. Through the bodies of children who seemed to be nothing but servants, playthings, or orphans. The circle's existence was maintained by ritual and by fear. They were not allowed to speak aloud even to each other. Instead, they played games of mimicry, contests to see who could form the most complex idea in shadow. Who could tell the saddest story, the gravest warning, or the most hopeful promisal without a sound. As they grew older, their skills became invaluable to the powers that ruled over them. Feuding lords would hide these children among the kitchen staff, or send them as gifts to rival courts, never revealing the true purpose behind their presence. At night, a message might be passed from one child to another, across the courtyard shadows, cast by a flickering torch, a silent relay of vital intelligence that could turn the tide of a siege, save a life, or doom an enemy. There are records, pieced together from trial transcripts and rare chronicles, hinting at moments when entire conspiracies unraveled because a single child's shadow revealed the presence of a traitor, or because a carefully coded warning danced across a wall, prevented an ambush no one else saw coming. The shadow language could not be broken by any codemaster, because it was never fixed. Each group of children developed their own dialect, their own patterns of movement. The language was living, evolving, impossible to transcribe. With time, some children escaped the orbit of their lords. A few faded into anonymity, carrying their silent wisdom with them. Others became legends, masters of espionage, trainers of a new generation, or ghosts who haunted the corridors of history. Sometimes, an old servant in a noble house might pause, watching two children play in the light of a dying fire, and wonder at the dance of shadows on the wall, seeing for an instant something older, stranger, and more dangerous than any weapon. What happened to the last of the shadow speakers is unknown. Some say the practice ended as kingdoms grew more stable and the need for such secrecy waned. Others insist the tradition moved underground, resurfacing in times of greatest turmoil. waiting in the wings for the moment when silence would once again become the most powerful language of all. The truth is that their legacy persists in the spaces we overlooked, the flicker of a candle, the tilt of a hand, the stories that live between the words we speak. To this day, in certain forgotten places, there are those who know how to listen. For the movement of secrets, who understand that what is hidden in shadow is often what matters most. And so, the children who learned to speak in darkness continue to haunt our history, reminding us that the deepest messages are never spoken, only shown, and only ever understood by those who have lived their whole lives in the silent dance of shadows.